Test 1, 2, 3.
So it is, it is 9:16.
Recording in progress.
It's 9:16, and I will call this meeting of the Board of Investments to order. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Kelly, let's have you lead this. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Do we have any requests for
We'll do this.
2449?
No.
Okay. Linda, do you have any comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair Santos. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual and in-person meeting, so we'll do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Knox?
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. Green? I see him. Mr. Santos?
Here.
Mr. Rue?
Present.
Mr. Jones?
Present.
Mrs. Jones?
Present.
Mr. Kelly? Chair Sanchez?
Here.
Okay. Staff participating in the meeting include the following: CIO John Grable, Deputy CIO Jude Perez, CEO Santos Kreimann, Deputy CEO Louis Lugo, Chief Counsel Stephen Rice, AEO JJ Popovich. Investment staff include Christopher Wagner and Derek Kong. Consultants on site are the Makita and Stepstone team. Trustees, please use your raise your hand option to be placed at the queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mic until you're ready to speak, and now we may proceed with the agenda.
Okay. Do we have any a motion to approve the minutes or any comments on the minutes?
So we have two sets of minutes. We can do them together or we can do them one by one.
Yeah,
Together?
motion together, yeah. I'll move approval of both.
Thank you. Thank you.
1 second. So I have to do the roll call because Mr. Santos is not here. So Mr. Knox made the motion. Mr. Kelly seconded. Okay, Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Sanchez?
Yes.
Okay. The motion passes unanimously.
Okay. Do we have any requests for public comment?
We do not.
All right. Let's move on to the executive update. Mr. Grable.
Good morning, Madam Chair, trustees. It seems like the echo may be back, so I'll maybe speak slower and apologize that people have to hear me kind of an infinite number of times. You know, it's tough enough listening to me. Let's start on page 4, please. Thank you. And as we can see on this slide, major markets turned down in August, and that downturn continued through September. So this slide shows the global market performance as of September 30, the end of our first fiscal quarter. In the month of September, equity markets as represented on the upper left in the ACWI IMI, which is our benchmark, was down 4.2%. Bonds, as represented on the upper right in the Bloomberg US Aggregate Bond Index, was down 2.5%. So when stocks and bonds don't work, it's difficult for our diversifying asset categories and strategies to carry the day. You know, at the end of the day, the direction of the portfolio is driven by stocks and bonds. Other strategies may dampen volatility, but once again, our portfolio really is a function of the top two boxes, global equity and bonds. The 3-month column on the bottom of the page, as well as in the charts on the top, show that it will be a down quarter It's no one likes to start, any period with a down quarter, but the first quarter of fiscal year 24 will be a down quarter. And maybe the silver lining, if there is any, is that we're in the midst of a asset allocation exercise, and everyone knows I like strategic asset allocation. So for me, what we're going through now is kind of like the bottom of the box of cereal. I mean, it's the good stuff, and maybe we wait every 3 years to do it. I go through cereal more quickly than that, but I think that
Good time.
it is. But as we go through this exercise, which is maybe the most serious thing that we do, put aside my levity, is we don't ignore the markets. Yet at the same time, we try not to time the markets. We don't have that type of prescience. No one does. We take the best information we have at any given point in time and make prudent pivots based upon that information. The biggest influence on the current strategic asset allocation exercise we are going through is the higher rate environment that we are currently in. We'll be discussing that later this morning when Makita goes through the strategic asset allocation update. And I'll just add a little more context if we can turn the page to slide 5. So the chart on the upper right covers more than 50 years, and that shows the historical 10-year Treasury yield over a 50-year period. And the recent increases in the U.S. 10-year Treasury is somewhat masked by that 50-year period, or the length of the x-axis. And there are two takeaways. The first is, or at least two takeaways, that the increase over the past couple of years is steep and significant, and that increase comes after 40 years of declines. So with that said, this is a different investment environment for most, if not all of us. There are very few people making investment decisions today that were making investment decisions at the origin of this chart. And over that 50-year period, there are a lot of macro themes that emerge in terms of how we invested, where capital is allocated based upon lower rates resulting in a lower cost of capital. There's been massive technology investments. We've gone from analog to digital as a result of that. We've gone from mainframe to distributed devices and networks. All of that was driven by the lower cost of capital and the resulting increase in technology investments. We've gone from goods to services at that same time. And there's also been, during this period, kind of simultaneous demographic shifts, which once again influences capital markets, influences capital allocations. There's been changing nature of immigration. There's been an increase in the number of dual income households. There's been prominence of different demographic cohorts in the workforce and now in retirement. And we've been through a period of globalization, maybe deglobalization right now, and a tremendous shift from Europe to Asia, just in terms of capital investments. So there's a lot in that historical 10-year Treasury chart, maybe beyond the scope of this discussion, but we're in a different investment environment. That's something that we need to be cognizant of and mindful of as we continue to asset allocate. So we can turn to slide 9. So slide 9 shows the total fund summary as of the end of August. For the month of August, the fund was down 1% net. AUM, or assets under management, finished the month at $73.7 billion. With a down quarter, we're closer to $72 billion today. Once again, it's a down quarter. But despite the market volatility, we have stability in our cash, which can be seen in the middle towards the bottom. We finished the month with about $960 million in cash. We always keep 3 months of benefits, on hand. That is something that we don't touch, that always sits in cash, is part of our business continuity planning, our tabletop exercises. That number will always be around $900 million, $1 billion or so. On the right side of the page is our asset allocation expressed through our functional categories, and everything is tightly on target. Turning to the next page, we can see the total fund on the top. And we have, as I've been saying periodically, that we have a nice positive variance against our benchmark over the 10-year period. We are also above our actuarial hurdles over the long terms as well. One thing I will draw your attention to is credit, one of our functional asset categories. It's one of our newer discrete categories. Over this period, it is a consistent performer. In volatile markets, good yielding investments are very helpful to generating returns. No one's going to take away that yield that you capture every month, every quarter, every year. Credit also is likely our only positive functional category for the quarter. So as we have this functional framework, and I talked about when stocks and bonds are down, it's really hard. Credit has been somewhat of an exception. Our allocation isn't significant enough that that's going to drive the day for us. But the high yield in that category is very positive for us, literally and figuratively. OPEB at the bottom of the page, $3.1 billion. The trust was down 1.9% for the month net, and we'll likely see more separation, positive and or negative, from the benchmark as illiquids grow in terms of the percentage of that pool of capital. So if we can turn to slide 20, and I'll finish my prepared comments on this page, and maybe we'll spend a little bit of time on it. On the upper left, we flag some key initiatives, and the one that is a hot link, new opportunities at LACERA.com, is one that I'll spend some time on. We have an intake portal that is under development and live. I believe that we have a very wide funnel for new opportunities. However, we can widen that funnel even more, and we can also, focus on ensuring that we have a consistent process. A random email to the CIO, hey, can you take a look at this, from a manager, is different than everything going to the same portal, being subjected to the same process. So we launched a portal for new investment opportunities. Firms can send materials and contact information to new investments, one word, at LACERA.com, invest opportunities being plural. It's live. We have already received some solicitations via the portal. We ask firms to identify their strategy and to attach materials, not just, hey, give me a call, or I have something that I'd like to discuss with you. Please attach materials. It once again, is in your best interest as a prospective business partner of LACERA to put your best foot forward. We will log everything in the portal, and we will respond. It's going to be consistent. And once again, new opportunities at LACERA.com. The next phase will be to move the email system into more of a self-service database. But this is something that's been underway. It sounds simple, but for some reason it hasn't been easy for us. And I would, big shout out to the team, maybe lowercase n capital T, in that every asset category was represented in the working group. So this isn't one person. This is something that everyone is involved, not just in launching, but in evaluating that which comes over the transom. And we also, a shout out to our colleagues in communications and systems in terms of having this live on the website. I think it is where like RFPs are listed. It's posted in a couple of different places under contact information, but please go to new opportunities at LACERA.com. And maybe on a high note, I'll just pause there for questions.
Mr. Kelly was also in the queue.
I did not.
You wanna go first, or?
Yeah, thank you. John, a couple of things. You noted that the Fitch rating agency had downgraded US. What are the implications of that to credit-linked notes like Freddie or Fannie? Do we have exposure to those in the portfolio, either in credit or enhanced cash? And do you see any other credit rating agencies taking the same or similar actions?
That's something that, Mr. Kelly, that I don't have a definitive answer on today in terms of my sense is, what is the alternative? To the extent that the U.S. is house, isn't necessarily in order, no pun intended, and there may be some fiscal challenges. There are challenges globally, and the U.S. is still in many senses a safe haven as it relates to our credit quality. But to the extent we see the cost of capital rising and that impacting or higher deficits, higher debt service that the U.S. government has to support, I think it's something that we'll see in the capital markets, maybe even in the sense of we may be a net beneficiary of that in terms of being able to capture higher yields. But it's something that we will monitor absent having a really good answer or declarative answer today.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Knox.
Thank you very much. And I think the new opportunities at LACERA.com is a great idea. We should refer folks to that site as well. And maybe a suggestion is we could get some canned language from you. If we get something in email, just a short paragraph that we can be consistent in messaging rather than just sending a link.
Yeah, and yes, Mr. Knox. And I know that we were working with Linda potentially to have business cards to the extent trustees want to hand out business cards to people, which may also ease. But yes, and we're also working on responses as it relates to acknowledgements to people that either submit something now to the email address, as well as to the extent we morph that into a database. I know something that JJ has, or various scripts, in terms of what he does in his day job. And I think that's really a good model for us to follow.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Jones.
Yes, thank you. I'm also very excited about the new opportunities at LACERA.com. I did have a question, if you could share, once they do submit a proposal. I know one of the concerns I've received from potential investors is, they're giving more of a standard response, thank you, but we're not interested. And so I'm just wondering what we would have in place with this once they've done the work, they've put their information in. If LACERA finds that they're not a potential candidate at the moment for investment, what process do we go through to work with them? Do we give them a qualitative response so that they could come back and improve? I'm just curious to what information we do provide them.
Sure, Ms. Jones. LACERA may work with several hundred asset managers at any given point in time. There may be tens of thousands, I don't know what the exact number is, institutional investment firms out there, especially if you look at the number of products a firm may have. The likelihood is that most will not do business with LACERA. If we add maybe 10 or so a year, that's what we call a year. What we will do is, and I think that we have a good relationship and a good process with our emerging manager programs, and we will forward and request that, be it Stable, be it Hamilton Lane, the equity managers are in the process of launching, that they will follow up directly, and they may be staffed to give more input, but we're not staffed to really underwrite a firm, to do a comprehensive diligence and say, you should do this with your back office. And also, I think that it sets an expectation that there may be a allocation, but for X. And in some sense, we have people or firms that will reach out to us and say, we've got the best Bitcoin strategy going. We don't have an allocation to Bitcoin, so there's not much that feedback that we can, give a firm, because most of the opportunities are for strategies that we don't have in the portfolio. But it's something that we want to, and we learn potentially of certain opportunities, but most firms will not have, it may not, odds are against most firms.
Understood. My other question, I was just curious, when we look at going back in the report, sorry, when we look at our cash balance, and I know it hovers around the level where we're at currently, is there ever a thought of increasing that? I know I think you said, 3 months worth of cash that is liquid. Is that part of our strategic allocation, or do we ever increase that for any reason? Obviously now with the rates the way they are at the Fed level, there's still returns we can get even in our liquid cash. So I was just curious, how do we determine whether we should put more into liquid cash versus the 3 months?
Yep. And through the chair, Mrs. Jones, the board determines that during the strategic asset allocation, right now we have a 1% allocation to cash, and we typically have more cash available than that 900 million. That 900 million or 960 million in this case is cash that in some sense is unencumbered, in that the cash above that, above the 1%, we use in the overlay, where we'll use it to really on a daily basis rebalance the portfolio back to strategic targets. So the cash is always working above that 1%, but we always keep 1% in a position where it really just is cash, that it's liquid, that we can use it for the operational purposes of LACERA.
And then my final question is on page 11 of the presentation. And I appreciate the different, this is like a new report every month. I get excited. It's like, oh, what else am I going to learn this month? So I just wanted to understand, or I think I understand, but if you could share, when we look at the active and excess returns, and we're kind of comparing like September 21 to August 23, obviously significant change there. I understand that, our active return is doing better, but what conclusion are we drawing with this, comparing the two time periods?
And I think that no moment in time is precise. I think that over long periods of time, we want to be compensated for making active investments, for active strategies. To the extent we're not, we are better served by just being index investors. So what we try to map, if you look at kind of the origin of this, we weren't potentially being compensated for the active risk we were taking. Now we are, in some sense, or we're being better compensated. So I would view this more as a trend analysis. And there's also details of charts like this in the quarterly performance report, also in the monthly CIO report about subsectors, different strategies where we're being compensated at the functional asset category level versus not. But I tend to view this more as a trend analysis. Is our implementation working?
Gotcha. And then I guess my final comment, not really a question, but I do always appreciate the staff charts every month. And so the one that I found very fascinating was on page 22. In the discussion of, what's being talked about, what's out there, and the artificial intelligence looks like that is becoming a very mentionable discussion. So I saw it as very interesting. So appreciate that information. It caused me to want to look into this whole topic more. But
And one thing to add to that, if I might, is in some sense, this may be a meta page in that it's probably an AI engine that is doing the search for these terms.
right?
Yeah, there's no conflict of interest here
Right.
at all.
That's all I had. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, all right. Any other questions? All right, thank you for that. I think suffice to say that this, this next period that we're going into is going to be very challenging, and it is, very, it's with a heavy heart that I say that. All right, moving on to our member spotlight.
Good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees. Please join me in taking a moment to recognize and celebrate the member selected for this month's Member Spotlight. Our Spotlight program is all about recognizing the hardworking members who serve the constituents of LA County and to celebrate their contributions to our community and to provide us with a moment to reflect and remember why we do what we do. So to serve our members. And this month, our Member Spotlight shines on, next page, please, Rose Fuller Laster. She's a pharmacy technician for the Los Angeles General Medical Center. She has 33 years of service, and she's not yet ready to retire, maybe next year. She loves her job. She manages budgets, pharmacy warehousing, and medication delivery, and her dedication is role is to fueled by compassion and motivation to save lives and support others who rely on her. And I wanted to point out, these are comments that they provide us when we interview them. Her hero was her mother, or is her mother, a resilient woman who raised 7 children while surviving on welfare, inspiring Fuller Laster's career of service and caring for the community. I wanted to highlight that because that's, an example of the type of people that work for the county. The county, they're here for the community to take care of others, and we're here to take care of them. So thank you very much, and that's Rose Fuller Laster. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you. And, as a reminder, I think it also just continues to underscore the importance of the pension fund and the role that it plays in people's lives and ability to retire with dignity, and certainly something that we should all aspire to in our own financial planning. So thank you for this. I love it every month.
So great.
All right, moving on.
I like the purple lanyard that she's wearing now, the 721 lanyard.
Yeah.
Necklace.
Well, no
She's a member,
conflict.
so.
So moving on to the Chief Executive Officer's report.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Sanchez. Good morning, committee or trustees, I should say. Glad the AV issues resolved. Our apologies. It's nice to not have people sound like they're performing on auto tune. So a couple of items from our CEO report. First, we've commented on the general election and retiree election. Those have concluded. They should be ratified by the Board of Supervisors next week on October 17th. Again, glad to welcome to the Board of Investments Nicole Mee, as well as Debbie Martin, effective January. And then we also have for the Board of Retirement, Nancy DeRazzo that will be starting with us in January as well. The team is working to schedule orientation. So again, glad to have those individuals join us on board and congratulate them on their elections. Also, there will be 2 appointments. I know Mr. Kreimann is working with the Board of Supervisors office, I think with District 3 and 2. So we're working to make sure that those appointments are effective January. Also within the report, we continue to make progress on our recruitment efforts. Mr. Grable highlighted the 4 active recruitments and investments, all of which are in different stages within a recruitment process, but still making progress there, as well as progress organizationally, especially within our some of the HR vacancies that'll help us expand our bandwidth. Lastly, this is more of a Board of Retirement, but I certainly wanted to highlight this because we provided some updates throughout the last week or so on the Kaiser strike. If you've read the news, the strike has ended as of Saturday morning, but they will probably look at, they do not have an agreement, and they will probably look at another strike. But again, from the standpoint of impacting our members, there was minimal impact as it relates to their service delivery. But obviously, we did get some calls in terms of concerns about appointments and just overall service delivery for our members. We have over 26,000 members that call Kaiser their primary health plan in terms of our retirees. So it's certainly important for us. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you for that. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Louis. In the election report, I didn't see, and I don't know if it's information that's available, of the people who voted. Do we know how they voted?
Yes, actually, I'll take Mr. Popovich. We do know how they voted, but I don't know if we have that readily available.
I'm going to assume you're talking about the method
Through which
that they voted.
correct.
I do. I could probably have access to that information. I don't have it available with me, but I will
That's fine.
get
Could
it
you
to you.
include it next month?
Yes, I will.
Okay, and then my other comment is I continue to be very disappointed in the relative percentage of retirees who do not have registered email accounts. Because you talk about 3 separate emails that went out to this population, but they only went to the 54% of the population that have active email addresses. There's 40-something% that don't have active email addresses. And I've been complaining about that for at least 3 years now. And JJ knows this because he's been on the other end of my complaints. What kind of outreach are you doing to ensure that people are enrolling? And have you actually considered requiring current workforce to register with a personal email as opposed to a county email that they then have to change when they leave active service?
So we do periodic PSAs and articles in our newsletters. Every time somebody talks to us, we ask them to, if you want to update your email address and your phone number too, because we also do text messaging it sometimes. Every time somebody comes in to retire, it's part of the required checklist that my staff goes through to ask them to change or remind them to change their email address. And we literally tell them, you're not going to have access to your county email address, so now's the time to do it. There is an effort I have on the plate, not sure where we're at in the stage of getting it done yet, but I do want to modify the member sworn statement process to see if we can put it behind the LACERA wall, which would require folks to go to LACERA to finish the process. The sworn statement process used to be very critical in that you had to make an election of what plan you go to. That's no longer the case. So it is more of an information gathering vehicle and a required step by law to make sure that we have some information. But if I can, the project that I have planned for is to move that registration behind the firewall. So you go to LACERA, log in, finish setting things up. And that would be the first step in establishing at the beginning of their career, their connection to us electronically. So that is on the plate. One of the big steps to that was recently completed when we started, when the Board of Retirement allowed electronic signatures. So that was, the one big step forward in doing that. The rest of it is now looking about how do we do that, technically and things like that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. With that, I think we'll move on to our next item. So we had a request to pull the item A on the consent agenda. So Mr. Kelly, do you want to? Oh, yep.
Mr. Rice? Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. So yesterday I had reviewed this and I sent Mr. Rice a number of comments, but I only address 2 of them this morning. And I will vote to support this, but I would ask you to consider my comments for the next go round.
Absolutely.
The first is there's an error. The Deputy Chief Investment Officer, LACERA, is an unclassified position and it's not listed as such in the table of positions. The other, my other 2 more material comments are, the code currently allows the CEO to make a determination in writing and waive, in essence, compliance with the policy, and the waiving document will be on file. What I didn't see here is that, and I think my colleagues should appreciate that this document and this policy is an important part of the agency's system of internal controls to protect the financial assets of the agency. And if the CEO is waiving compliance with this policy, given the board's ratification of the policy, I think the CEO should copy the board on those waivings. He should not be able to act alone because he could be in cahoots with another party. So I'd ask that you consider notification to the board next go round. And then the other thing is just the timing of this I thought was problematic. I'm not very comfortable that we're ratifying something that we didn't get to see before it was submitted to the Board of Supervisors. Now, I know you were not responsible for the submission to the Board of Supervisors, but next time I think the board should consider it before you submit it to the county, so that comments like this could be incorporated prior to submission. Those are my most material comments. So thank you. I'm going to support it, but again, consider them for next year, please.
Absolutely. And thank you for on both points. Points well taken. We will absolutely. Just on the consultant position, that language is directly from the regulations, but we can go above and beyond and have that extra notification in place. So that's something we will look at and come back in regards on that matter. And we also agree in terms of the timing. It was not ideal. It's not our historical practice. And moving forward, we'll make sure that doesn't happen again.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I'll move the item.
Thank you.
Second.
Second. All right, take a vote.
Okay, and Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Green,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes.
Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mrs. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Ms. Sanchez.
Aye.
Okay. The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Kelly, thank you for your diligence. Those were great comments. Moving on to our non-consent items, we have an information technology manager appointment. So Mr. Lugo, are you taking that?
Yes.
Great.
Chair Sanchez, committee members, before you have the IT Manager 2 Business Solutions. It's an issue of compensation. It did go through the Board of Retirement. I did approve it last week, and it's coming before this board, again, as a matter of compensation. As we talked about, this is one of the tenets of our litigation in terms of compensation with the county. And as we're looking out to market and trying to be a competitive and attractive employer, we're seeing, especially for some of the more technical positions such as IT, that we have to raise the bar a little. So the compensation that we're looking at for this individual supersedes that of the CEO's authority. So we're looking for this board for approval. So with that, we'll take any questions.
Okay. Do we have any questions?
So moved. No,
Yep.
no question.
Yeah. For those of us in tech,
Yeah, just-
we're with you.
Second.
Yes. Question by Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. So I have two material issues with this. The first is this is a senior management position, but there's no discussion in the narrative about management capabilities. There's just discussion about IT capabilities. He knows this, he knows this. I didn't know what agile technology was. I had to look it up. And I think if I'm right, if I looked it up right, it's just a method of development. It's not a particular code or something. So I didn't get any sense as to his competencies as a manager, as a senior manager. He's having 30 people reporting to him. So I'd like you to comment on that. And the second is similar to my comment about the conflict of interest policy. I don't think it was appropriate for you to extend a conditional offer of employment without coming to these boards. You didn't have the authority to do that. It's these boards who approve the salary, and then you can go and act. And by telling him by issuing a conditional employment letter to him, you assumed what this board's action would be, and I've never been comfortable with that over the last decade now. You should never assume what this board's action should be, because this board has the responsibility to act, not you. So I'm not going to support it based on the second perspective, based on my second comment, because I think it was wrong. But can you comment on management capabilities? I mean, you're asking us to place him at a significant level. Now, does he understand that he needs to achieve a performance evaluation rating of exceeds or better in order to get future step increases, and his future step increases are limited. I think how many steps are there in tier 2 items? 16?
18.
18? Okay. So he's only got 3 more years for additional steps. And for each of those years, he does need to obtain a performance rating of exceeds or better. But can you speak to us a little bit about his management capabilities and why his management capabilities warrant such a placement?
Yeah, Trustee Kelly, I'm gonna have Ms. Guglielmo and Ms. Delano speak to that in terms of his qualifications.
Sure. I'm happy to answer that. So his 18 years are in management of IT, and the memo should have specified that, but he has managed teams much larger than he will be managing at LACERA, and he does have 18 years management experience in IT shops very similar to ours and larger.
And is it, and talk to me a little bit about his expectations about virtual work or remote work. Is he intending on coming into the office at least for the first year and meeting his staff, or?
He'll have a hybrid work schedule just like the rest of us.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Kelly, if I could, through the chair, Trustee Kelly, if I could, I'd like to add, as part of the interviewing process, which there were 2 stages of interviews, which included Mr. Lugo and myself, along with Ms. Delano. There were a number of questions related to leadership. We do agree with you that these positions require, really, they are not so much the technical doers of the work, but leading those folks. So they need to have enough technical knowledge and background in order to lead people, but certainly their leadership skills are really what sets them apart. So Mr. Gopanapalli, along with many of the other candidates, had exceptional leadership skills, and he just rose to the top of the selection. And also, just to clarify, we made it very clear to Mr. Gopanapalli that the conditional offer employment was subject to the approval of both boards, that it was a highly unusual situation for us to come to the boards to request this, and that there was a risk of him not receiving the board's approval. So we made that very clear up front, as along with the requirements for future wage increases. Unfortunately, we found that frankly, while he was our top choice, all of the top candidates had salary expectations that would have put them in a similar predicament.
And my concern regarding authority is that you requested he go through background check. That's the part at which I don't think you should have had done, because the boards did not approve the salary placement.
Mr. Rice, you
yes, I wanted
to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair Sanchez and Trustee Kelly and trustees. Good morning. I wanted to address the sequencing concern that Trustee Kelly is expressing. This is a position for which the CEO is appointing authority. However, the LACERA portion of the salary ordinance does require the boards to approve that appointment. It's our view that the sequencing that we're following, and this is the first time this has happened during the 9 years I've been here, but it's going to be happening more and more. In fact, it's going to be happening in November with a senior legal position, and so we need to have clarity on the process. We've given this a lot of thought, and we believe that under the salary ordinance, the sequencing where we issue a conditional offer expressly under the CEO's appointing authority, expressly conditional on the approval of both boards per the ordinance, and then getting that offer letter signed, so we have a committed candidate that we're bringing with you, and not bringing to you a candidate who may not be committed, right, or with whom there may be an issue as to the terms of the offer letter, and then asking you for the final approval with complete transparency all the way along the process is the correct way to do it. We could do it differently, but we believe this is the correct way of doing it, both under the ordinance and managing the process, just from a communication and effectiveness point of view with the candidate and with the boards.
I appreciate that, Mr. Rice, but I think one of the things you're not considering is that you could end up in a situation where you get information from the background check process that there are whole defined procedures about how to deal with that prior to the board's approving the salary. And I don't know. I think that could be really problematic. You're assuming the background check will be clean, but it may not be.
I don't think that's the assumption. If the background, the offer remains contingent on several things. It remains contingent on board approval. It's also contingent on reference checks, and it's also contingent on background checks. We want to give the board as much information as possible, but we've kind of got to manage the process. There are issues of notice to candidates' current employees and just being efficient about the process. So again, I think reasonable minds could differ. I'm not saying this is cast in stone, but I just wanted to emphasize this was something that was given a lot of thought under the language of the ordinance and also just managing the process.
I appreciate that. Do you know what Mother County does?
I don't, and I don't know how often they encounter this situation.
They do it. They encounter it pretty often.
Yeah.
I'd just be interested in it. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the record, Mr. Rice, I can tell you that having had to hire senior hires, I support the position that you have taken personally. Ms. Jones?
Yes. Good morning. I just wanted to support the process. I think in all of my experience in government, I think the process that's in place is acceptable because there are several factors involved when you extend an offer to an employee. And first is finding out if they're interested in taking the position. These days, it's very interesting. Someone will go through the entire process and then say, I'm sorry, I have another offer. And so the first and foremost is to extend the offer to see if they're interested and committed. And then there is sometimes a discussion of pay, and you're absolutely correct. I think we're going to have more scenarios where people are going to want to come in at the high end. So we have to be competitive for sure. And so that would be a factor to discuss. And then I also know when doing background checks, it is really difficult sometimes to get the results back as far as the flow. Everybody's short-staffed. You know, you're working with an agency to do the background and investigation, whatever all that's going on. And so sometimes it takes some time to get that information back. So you want to get that started as soon as possible as well. I do appreciate Mr. Kelly's concern that if, you know, the board voted no, there is an expense that has been incurred, but I think that is also the nature of doing business. So I just wanted to share, I don't think that this process is out of order. I think it is unfortunately a way of flowing right now because it is so hard to get good candidates. You want to hold on to them and grab them because it's a tough market out there. In our conversation right now, you know, crossing fingers that this person is still on board. So it's a tough market out there, but I appreciate it and I do understand it. And as Mr. Rice indicated, there will be more coming, and I probably would anticipate that may be the norm for a while because the experienced clientele or the experienced pool, I think is shrinking. And so we're trying to attract the top level persons and so or employees. So I support this.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Yeah, just kind of a brief repeat. I know that we, even in the CEO's report, we saw I think ever since I've been on the board, kind of a persistent 21% vacancy gap. And we've asked the reasons why in terms of whether it's process, whether it's compensation, it's all those things. And I just think when it comes to being competitive for the top people we want, and I always appreciate Trustee Kelly's cautiousness from a detail perspective, but at the same time, we are competing, and you can get a yes on the phone one day, you're slow 2 days, and then they got something else, right? And so just to add that to the conversation, because I know we collectively care about particularly some of the senior roles that we're trying to fill, getting the best people in and having as little ghosting go on as possible as a result. So, okay.
That's a term of art. Thank you. Mr. Kreimann, you have a concluding comment?
I just wanted to make sure that I expressed that I too, when I was first approached with this particular candidate and the negotiations that were going, that my concern was shared by Mr. Kelly, and I asked all of those pertinent questions. But in this particular instance, especially trying to attract the high-level talent that we need, especially in the IT arena, I made the decision that yes, we need to extend the offer conditionally. We did talk with Mr. Rice about it. We had a full discussion at the highest level of the organization, and we were comfortable with actually making this particular decision to move forward. We think it's in the best interest of LACERA in the long run. The negotiating environment is a lot different than when you and I, Trustee Kelly, first came to the county, where it was sort of a take it or leave it situation where every single county employee started at the first step. And the candidate pool was large and broad. This is at the higher levels. And so you should expect, or at least the board should expect, that the sequencing that we provided is going to be a more common occurrence, just based on the demands that are being made and the negotiating leverage that the candidates do have, especially at those higher levels. And so we do share your concerns. We keep those in mind, and I can guarantee you that as we start moving forward, we will always ask those questions first. My intention is always to negotiate something that is within my authority first. And if I can't get there, and I think the candidate provides a lot of value to the organization, then we will make the decision to move it forward to the boards and get the proper authority and make the conditional offer that we did to this particular candidate. So thank you, and I'd be more than happy to answer any specific questions about our process internally as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Kreimann. We have a motion and a second.
Okay, Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Green,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes.
Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mrs. Jones, Mr. Kelly.
I want to thank my colleagues for their input. I will vote yes.
Oh, thank you. And Chair Sanchez.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, great. For the next item, I believe we have to have Mr. Kreimann recuse himself.
Yep, I will move him to the waiting room. Okay, he has been moved.
Okay, and so now I will hand it to Mr. Rice to walk us through the split dollar whole life insurance policy.
Good morning again, Chair Sanchez and trustees. The Brown Act requires that I make a statement before this item is considered and voted upon. And the reason for that is it relates to an item of senior executive compensation and benefits. This item relates to a recommendation that under the CEO's 2019 employment agreement and a 2020 amendment, the board approved the purchase of a $300,000 split dollar life insurance policy for Chief Executive Officer Santos Kreimann, of which $200,000 will be paid to the CEO's beneficiaries at his death, and the balance of the policy and accumulated value being paid to LACERA at that time to assist in premium recovery. The premium schedule is in my board in the board materials and starts out for the first 20 years at an annual premium of $27,818. At that point, the premium goes down for a period of time and then ends. This item requires the approval of both boards. The Board of Retirement approved it last week. As I stated, this item does relate to the life insurance provision of the CEO's 2019 employment agreement. As with most, if not all, county department heads, the split dollar life insurance is part of the benefit package that's provided to them. This happened with Mr. Kreimann's contract. He was accorded the benefit package also provided to all prior LACERA CEOs. In fact, we're still paying premiums on, for example, Greg Rodemaker's split dollar policy, because this is a standard benefit that has been given per the L item schedule of benefits within the county structure for many, many years. Unfortunately, it was not possible to obtain a policy for reasons that are personal and really aren't appropriate for public discussion, but it was not possible to get a policy underwritten in 2019. So therefore, in early 2020, we came twice to both boards in joint meetings and explained the situation to the boards, and with the assistance of Fiduciary Counsel, entered into a 2020 amendment approved by the boards, providing that the organization would guarantee the CEO a $200,000 death benefit, provided that that agreement was terminable at such time as it was possible for a policy to be issued. The amendment provided that the CEO would cooperate with LACERA in undergoing providing information periodically to continually attempt to attain a policy. And in fact, every 6 months, Mr. Kreimann has consulted with, or approximately every 6 months, with the insurance agent for the split dollar program, Bryant Bazagian, who is here at the meeting today. And finally, just in the past month or so, Mr. Bazagian has been successful through a great deal of effort and persistence in obtaining a policy. In consultation with the Deputy Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Lugo, and in consultation with Fiduciary Counsel along the way to make sure there was an independent voice, not in Mr. Kreimann's reporting line, was involved. We determined to obtain a policy for $300,000, not to increase the benefit to Mr. Kreimann's beneficiaries, but to assist in the premium recovery. And that is what we have obtained. The policy is cancelable, as stated in the board memo, should the boards decide they do not want to go this direction. It is nevertheless a contractual requirement, and the intent of the amendment was that the amendment would only remain in effect and would terminate at such point in time as coverage was now available as it is now. There is a 3-month vesting period typically for these policies, but Mr. Kreimann has satisfied this vesting period because he's now in his at 4 years almost exactly of employment with LACERA. So the policy would be vested immediately, and there'd be no waiting period before it was effective. And it also therefore is portable as well and would survive the end of his employment with LACERA. So with that, I would open it up for questions. Again, Mr. Bazagian is here. Mr. Klausner, unfortunately, is not here today because he's traveling, but his views are documented in his words in the board memo, and the board. He was present for the board of retirement meeting, so we do recommend this item to the boards for approval.
Thank you.
Move approval.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. So I think the employment agreement with Mr. Kreimann was probably sourced from the most recent employment agreement prior to him, who came to us from the outside of the county family. And so it made sense to include the language that we did, and I suspect that was carried over. Why that's important to me is that Mr. Kreimann, the agreement says he'll get what L items get within the county. I was an L item, and I got split dollar life insurance when I was treasurer tax collector. That was portable after I go. I don't pay the premiums, the county board does. Mr. Kreimann was previously a county department head. He obtained an L item when he was head of beaches and harbors, and he was granted a $250,000 life insurance policy by the county board after he was appointed, and he continues to maintain that policy today. He maintained it even though when he left Beaches and Harbor and went to the CEO as a non-department head, and when he went to work for the assessor, Jeff Prang, as chief deputy assessor. Mr. Kreimann has currently, without this board taking any action, the same benefit for life insurance as L items in the county. So this is duplicative as far as I'm concerned. And the history of him being an L item is important information that I believe should have been included in the memo. So can you comment on why the memo doesn't include reference to his L item and why this is not duplicative of a benefit he currently has accrued to him?
It's not duplicative because his LACERA contract in Exhibit B to the contract, which is in your board memo, documents LACERA's agreement that he will be provided with a policy by LACERA. He does have a vested policy with the county, and this will be a second policy provided by LACERA. And it's not duplicative because one was the result of county employment, and one was something that was negotiated in his agreement at the time he was employed by LACERA. There was discussion at the joint board meeting in September of 2020 about this issue, and I think there was some expression on the part of the boards that should future senior county executives be employed by LACERA in the future, that we be alert to this issue. It doesn't mean we still, through negotiation, wouldn't have to agree to it. But in this case, it was not. We granted this benefit without considering that issue. I don't think the board had been informed of this issue or that it came up at all. This was what I was informed during the. I wasn't a party to the CEO's contract negotiations, but this was the subject of discussion at the September 2020 joint board meeting, and so I think the takeaway is that with future CEOs, this could be something from the county. We would be alert to this, but Mr. Kreimann's agreement is what it is.
Do you know if this language was the same language in the prior CEOs? Did in essence we carried over and we missed it?
This agreement is different from prior CEOs' contracts in some material respects, but this Exhibit B, the benefits that were provided were the same.
I hear what you're saying, but I think one solution would be that Mr. Kreimann himself tell LACERA, thanks, but no thanks. I already have split life insurance. And he's not done that, correct?
He has not done that.
Does he have the ability to not accept this from the perspective that if he already has it, can he not accept a life insurance policy from LACERA?
He could waive the contract right that he has. And there's no ability for LACERA to compel that.
Yeah, I think he's double dipping, and I don't think that's appropriate. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any further comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
Can I get the key too?
Yes.
So is LACERA? Are we part of the? We're a pseudo government entity. Are we part of LA County, or are we?
LACERA is an independent public agency. Our employees are employees of the county. This is the way the statute is structured, but we are an independent.
We're independent, right?
Agents. Yeah. Yes, we're a separate agency from the county. We're not part of the county.
Right. Our employees at LACERA, they get pension as well, right?
That's correct.
Do they participate in the LACERA pension? I mean, the county LACERA pension?
That's correct. And that's actually one of the reasons why, as far as the legislative history is concerned, that pension fund employees under Searle were made employees of their county so that they could share in the pension benefit. There would have been other ways to address that, but that was the way this legislature chose to address that issue.
So just because LACERA employees receive pension from the county doesn't necessarily make them county employees, right?
Beg your pardon?
LACERA employees.
Yes.
Because we're an independent body from the county, but it was obviously back then, LACERA could have chosen to have a separate pension plan outside of LACERA, right? I mean, outside of the county pension plan.
No, because under the statute, LACERA LACERA employees are county employees.
Yeah. So, yeah, because going to the question is, if LACERA is an independent body of the county, then it would be two separate entities, right? So it would be like working for another company altogether.
That's right, but by quirk of this legislative history, we are county employees.
Except for pension.
It is true, just to refine your prior question, it is LACERA, for example, performs its own collective bargaining. LACERA chooses to sign on to the county negotiated fringe agreement. We don't have to do that. We could negotiate a separate fringe agreement, but we have never done that. We've just piggybacked. That's been a choice that the boards have made, actually, is to piggyback for represented employees, and that's carried over for non-represented. We've chosen to piggyback on the county fringe agreement while separately negotiating our own MOUs.
Okay, thank you.
And one other item to add, I think that's relevant, is LACERA also pays the employer contribution for our employees, as opposed to the larger plan sponsor.
Okay. Mr. Green?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Unless I missed something, this doesn't even have anything to do with Mr. Kreimann. This is life insurance for his family in case he were to pass away, correct?
He pays. He has imputed income on account of receiving the insurance, but he doesn't receive a benefit from a personal, aside from the comfort that it may provide him in knowing that his heirs will receive an insurance benefit.
So I second the motion. I have a vested interest in making sure that his family is taken care of were something to happen to him, and quite frankly, embarrassed by some of the comments that were made today. We should be lifting up our staff and making sure we're supporting them. To have a debate about someone's life insurance policy, whether the idea is, I don't feel like he's double dipping, and I think it's the wrong precedent to send and be speaking in favor of this motion, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Santos?
I totally agree with Mr. Green. It is embarrassing for me to entertain this discussion. So I'm in favor of the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones? Aye. Mr. Kelly?
No.
Ms. Sanchez?
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes with 1 no.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, we now are moving on into our report section. We have the Board of Governance Peer Review Plan, which Makita has spent time preparing for us and will walk us through that. So I will hand it over to Mr. Fila and Ms. Eisen, no, just Mr. Fila, to discuss our peer group plan review, and Ms. Eisen.
Perfect, thank you very much. This is an intentionally dense presentation here today. This has been an ongoing process that was initiated several months ago, looking at the overall governance structure. And I believe this is one of the most important topics that this board can review. Governance, unlike investments, is one area where you can essentially exert near absolute control of the environment that you're in. Whereas with the investment side and the strategic asset allocation, as you're going to hear about a little bit later, there's uncertainty around all aspects of that. So we usually try to present things in a concise and very reader-friendly manner. In this case, there was a lot of homework to do, so I do apologize for a little bit of the length that's in here. If we can.
But we really appreciate the effort you went to be thorough for us.
If we could skip to the next slide, just on the background, I think I hit most of it there, but really this is keyed in on LACERA's ongoing strategic plan of towards best-in-class investor, an important board-approved initiative. I just want to talk a little bit also here about the comprehensiveness of the peer review that we did go through. This was all of the plans in the United States outside of plans that use a sole fiduciary model that are within either larger or same size as LACERA or 20% smaller. So in past exercises and various different things that we see, there's often, use of anonymous plans and possible cherry picking of the peer group, but this one is fully comprehensive, and I think we've disclosed everything here. There was no survey or anything of other boards. This is all fully publicly available information and directly pulled via a very manual process from their websites and publicly available documents. And we do recognize that there are certain ongoing governance reviews at others. One example is we know Oregon is undergoing one as well. So we can't necessarily say that this is fully reflective of where everyone is in their process at this moment in time. So just with that one caveat. Next on the next slide, please. Just sort of introducing this concept overall. We did in August review all of the different types of governance model that public funds follow. LACERA currently uses a hybrid plan. So there is use of partial delegation. In this particular case, the board has delegated private equity re-ups with existing managers, co-investments, secondaries across private markets, and recently credit. And then also overall portfolio management and rebalancing for a while now has been delegated through the CIO. Currently, the board does retain authority for manager selection in largely public market areas, including global equity, fixed income, hedge funds, and then for new mandates in private markets. The other thing that I want to highlight here is LACERA currently has a very robust structure review process for each of the underlying functional categories, at which point guidelines and various different current delegation thresholds are established. And we look at that as a pretty strong anchor for considering additional delegation. Next slide, please. So overall, this is really, hopefully everyone read this slide ahead of time because it doesn't do much good now, but the idea was really for you all to consider in depth what language and policy others have in place so that we can use that as the lens to evaluate LACERA's current policies, identify any particular areas for further development. So hopefully you all have some ideas of plans that either resonated with you or not. My intention is not to go through every single one of the plans. I do have a few that I will highlight, but ideally when we get to that section of the presentation, you all can start a healthy dialogue on which ideas might resonate overall with this board. So next, moving on. I think I highlighted all of these for the most part. There is going to be organizational differences just with titles and various different things. So, you know, we're noted and there might be some confusion on certain plans relative to their titles. You know, just caveat that it's not meant as a commentary on anything that is happening sort of in the overall organizational structure at LACERA. Next page, please. So here you can see these are the national peer public plans. Because this group is large overall, I broke it into two categories. This is the first one where all of these plans are greater than $100 billion in assets. Most of the names are well known and were brought up when we did the previous board survey on plans to look at as peers. And you can see here that 11 out of the 12 largest of these plans all delegate authority really across all implementation areas, with the exception of Oregon, which we know is going through a current governance review process, literally seemingly exactly in parallel to where you all are.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Quick? So appreciate all the work that's been done here, and I definitely see directionally from the comparisons and everything. One of the things that I do think is missing that you obviously can't catch up right here, but I just want to know your opinion on, is that as we look at the relative plan sizes and the level of authority given to whether it's investment committee approach or to the CIO, I don't know if maybe right alongside best in class investor, there should be best in class board. And I don't know what the boards are like for these groups from a style perspective to kind of know, to kind of translate a little bit what it looks like on the other side. So, and I know there's probably infinite varieties, but can you kind of give us a little bit of a sense that when you look at these plans that have all this delegated authority, which is the kind of direction of the overall presentation, without getting to the ending of the movie for those of you who haven't read it. But I am curious about the board makeup here, and what characteristics can you say about these boards that also kind of match up with the delegated authority given to those organizations, if you don't mind. Thanks.
Sure, and I think I spent a little bit of time on this in the August presentation when we highlighted all of the different governance models that are out there. The one model that really stands apart and isn't captured here is the Canadian model, where they're fully independently set up investment organizations, not unlike LACERA, where they're independent of the plan sponsor. But those ones function more in a corporate basis, where the directors of those are fully expected to be experts. I would say for this peer universe, for the most part, there are a couple where they would have smaller boards that are expected to be fully expert. Most of them have a similar representation, whether they use a dual board approach, so board of retirements plus an investments board, or just a single board that handles all of these items. A similar mix of appointees and various different mixes of overall sort of professional experience versus things. There's of the majority of this group, LACERA doesn't deviate very much from the overall constitution, at least on this board. I don't work directly with the board of retirement, but I think things look pretty similar here.
Yeah, I would second that from my experience as well. Good, go ahead.
Perfect. So the other things that I think are interesting here, the general consistent policy is to have any delegation articulated through the IPS, but there are a couple of organizations that we'll highlight, such as New York State Teachers, that have actually elevated governance and specific mention of delegation into their investment beliefs. So that just sort of shows how important they view that to their overall organization, and how central that is to their processes going forward. Next on the sort of smaller peer group, can you skip slides, please? Perfect. So these ones are, again, the comprehensive list other than sole fiduciary plans that are roughly as of 6/30, 20% lower in asset values to where LACERA is, up to 100 billion. And here you see, again, pretty strong delegation across the board, a partial model in Minnesota, and then Illinois Teachers fully still retains investment authority at their board level. You do see another example here where Ohio Teachers has also elevated governance through delegation into their investment beliefs. So overall, when you add it all up, a pretty strong majority of the peers do pursue the delegated model. This was higher than the last time we looked at it, because there are a few plans that moved in a different direction. Michigan was one, various others, obviously. Oregon's going through a process. So I think the last time we all met, you asked us to look at the trend, and I think the trend is fairly strong and kind of comes through here. So it's not just capturing a moment in time, but I do think from our last findings, where it was around 75%, we're at a much higher percentage overall that are delegating at this moment in time. So
Tim, can I ask you another question?
Absolutely.
So in the iteration of this delegated authority, I noticed that there were some that kind of specified it out by asset class versus those that just kind of had a general one through there. So in the progression that goes, does it typically go asset class, total authority? Does it go total authority, but then we break out private equity, or we break out something else different? What's kind of the
So I can only really speak to the client experiences that are Makita clients that other members of my team have shared with me. And I would say it's kind of a 50-50 mix where, LACERA has gone through certain different categories, really looking at initially that rebalancing decision and then also moving into the private markets as sort of obvious stepping stones of kind of building a trust bridge, I think has been brought up in past conversations. And that's been an exercise. But others, when there's organizational change, either big shifts in the board, possibly new CIOs coming on board with other plans, there'll be sort of a wholesale review and it'll just be one fell swoop. And from the research that's been shared with me, it seems like it's a 50-50 mix of how people, got to the final delegation decision, whether it's through that measured step-by-step trust bridge approach or whether it's just as like a wholesale review process.
Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there any correlation to tenure of CIO?
I don't think there's any, at this point in time for all of these plans. There are very few of the plans that have very long-lived CIOs. No offense to John, that's not exactly the office that has the most durability in the investment landscape.
Yeah.
There are a few prominent examples in here. STIRS, where they've had a one CIO for a very long time. PERS being the exact opposite example. Florida, where they used to have one for a very long period of time. But I don't think there's any direct correlation there. And oftentimes it is sort of the change and the recognition of, change either at the board level and how much volatility is there, but also within the CIO that you want to have a durable governance process that's sort of is set up to endure a change of CIO, or a change of board leadership. This should elevate above all of that, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I would just piggyback on those comments. I think the notion, I think the reason that we are seeing so much change, at least from my perspective, is the kind of the industry, the pension industry's embrace of the notion that this is a professional job that requires professional ownership and management. And I think that has led sort of organizations to rethink how to create a policy that can endure change, but that has that core tenet that our fiduciary obligation is not to try to make a 30-minute decision on behalf of our pensioners and our beneficiaries, but to entrust that decision to people who will put 1,000 hours of work into that decision. And that, I think, is core to the trend we're seeing across the industry. Ms. Jones?
Thank you so much for this report. I did find it very informative to see the different agencies, specifically ones that are much larger than LACERA. And so this helped give me some insight as well, as I know I've expressed my concerns in this area. But my question with this information now is, I do understand that this authority is highlighted in different ways, right? And as you indicated, was it New York State teachers, it's a part of their investment beliefs. But then in other areas, it's a part of the governance policy, et cetera. And I guess my question is, what level of detail is provided in that authority that's outlined in the different policies or beliefs? Is it like one sentence, or, does it give, very, and I'm sure it varies among agencies, but I just wondered what you found in your research in that.
That's a great question. And well, this seemed dense. If we were to include some of that additional granularity, this thing would have gone into, multiple different binders. So I would say, from our viewpoint, the best practice is to have your highest level governance be fairly succinct. And that's, the investment beliefs, and then that gets incorporated into the IPS. But you do see just an absolute huge variety of governance manuals, policies, procedural documents for each one of these organizations. So some of them have separate investment policies that literally govern every asset class, and those documents may be 5 to 50 pages long, depending on the level of detail that they go through. I think when you codify some of that level of detail in high level policy, you're gonna lose your audience. It's really hard for the knowledge transfer. And I like LACERA's process of doing the structure review that does have that sort of every other year intense level of focus and detail on that particular asset category, and then the guidelines live within that approved document, as opposed to elevating a lot of massive amount of detail into the policy. But honestly, it's probably a 50-50 mix on, super detailed guidelines, asset class by asset class, calling out the delegation, or just sort of high level policy sitting on top and governing it all.
So if we were to be prudent and move, if as a body the decision was to move more towards some of the models that you have presented to us, what is your recommendation of the best strategy in doing that type of transition?
So I'm going to maybe ask John to join me for this one really quickly overall. So we've shared all of this research with staff. Like, we have a spreadsheet that has links to every single one of these documents. And I think rather than us making a recommendation on it, LACERA as a board and in collaboration with Makita and staff, we went through sort of a policy harmonization process, I think maybe 3 years ago. And this would probably warrant something along those lines. I think the first step of this would be to just codify it in the IPS and use some of the existing structure there, but then still also go through a comprehensive review, because there are other documents that are out there, like the board powers retained and delegated documents that Funston provided in 2016. So I think there's a pretty comprehensive policy harmonization exercise that needs to go on, but that I think the high level document of the IPS should govern all other things. And if you wanted to take action, that would be the process. And I think the language would have to come from you all and working with staff on what's possible. But I think next meeting would be prepared to work with staff on some ideas to do that IPS language, and then sort of push everything else into a more comprehensive review down the line. And I think a lot of the guidelines and things, you just maybe go through your normal structure review process. So where there are, guidelines that include delegation now, like in private markets and various other places, you keep those, but there may be other areas where you have to do an accelerated structure review to take this into account. I don't know if John has any thoughts, but it should be collaborative as opposed to just, one recommendation, I think, from us.
Yes, and I would also add that Mr. Santos and myself will also be a part of that conversation to represent the board. And obviously, if there's specific interest to review, let's do that together and make sure that we have input into the sort of policy writing that's going to come, because the idea really is to get to the point where we can review very concrete concepts. And so right now it's just to sort of review what is the current state of play in the industry. Where do we land in that relative to best practices? And the next step on Makita's plan, on the plan that we created with Makita, was to review how we could incorporate really finite language into our policy and what the next steps are. Mr. Grable, you want to chime in here, and then we'll go to Mr. Santos and Mr. Jones.
I don't necessarily have much to add, other than I think that we would have to reconcile our various policies, procedures, protocols to make sure that they're unified. Because I know when we went through that exercise several years ago, we had policies and procedures that didn't necessarily map and that were at odds. So I think that this would require us to really review all our documents, streamline it in some ways, elevate it, make it principles based like we've been doing. But I think that we've been we have a working group based upon some feedback at the offsite that we've created on staff just to look at how others do this.
Right. And I would also point out that we have actually done quite a bit of policy harmonization. That has actually been something we've been doing for 5 straight years. So, John, you probably can quote some of these policies at this point, having looked at them. And so we are at least very well positioned to do this work.
So and thank you for that information and that insight. And I also just want to share my appreciation for receiving this document at the level of detail and care that was put into it, because it is very helpful to have, obviously you make better decisions the more educated you are, the more informed you are. And at the same time, I do want to advocate that although, we could have a list of all the different, because I also work in government, right? So we can have a list of a lot of agencies that do it X, Y, and Z that, doesn't always mean that is the best way. It just means that's the way it's been done for years. But I do appreciate, however, going a little bit further into the process and not just saying, well, there's 10 that do it, right? So we should do it, but that also looking at how they're doing it, how effective is it being done, and what should be documented, what level of detail should be included, so that it's very thoughtful and it's not just, we're blanket rubber statement with one sentence that says, we give all authority to the CIO. So I do appreciate this conversation. And so thank you for the report.
Thank you. Mr. Santos. Mr. Santos.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Fila. I have a couple issues that I'd like to raise. One of the first issue is the fact that, from my perspective, Mr. Grable has been able, since he's been here, he has been able to develop a lot of trust from me in particular, and also trust with the staff. And he has developed his team. And Mr. Grable's integrity is the highest in my view. So, and I know Mrs. Jones at one point brought up the issue that perhaps we should have Mr. Grable be included in this policy if we do decide to do this. And at first, quite frankly, I was a little skeptical, but in thinking about it, I think it makes a lot of sense. Maybe not in particular naming Mr. Grable, but rather to give an opportunity for the board such time that Mr. Grable decides to exit, hopefully never, but you never know, to have the board at that time review this to make sure that that's what they want to do. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking is that, well, why, when Mrs. Jones brought up this issue, I was thinking, well, what is, if you're on the board and you decide to hire a particular individual to replace Mr. Grable, well, you're given a certain amount of trust to this individual. So, but in Ms. Sanchez and I had meetings with the staff and watching the dynamics there with the staff and Mr. Grable and with each other. It just really gave me a level of confidence that we need to have this policy in place where the board will review this and perhaps do away with this policy for a period of time. That will be up to that particular board to decide whether they want to just continue this policy or not. So that's something that hopefully I'm making sense, but I agree with Mrs. Jones' point. And so we need to think about, do we want to name the particular individual, or do we want to develop some type of language that allows the board at such time to review this policy and make a decision whether or not they want to maintain this delegation of authority. The other concern that I have or issue is that I'm encouraged to deal with this change, if we decide to do the change, is that the fact that we do have internal investment committees. That is very powerful, in my view. But the question that I have, and perhaps Mr. Grable can address this, is that I want to make sure that those individuals who participate in the investment committee, that those individuals who have a different view of a particular proposal, investment proposal, that they would not, they'd be free to speak up without any type of fear. In the discussions that we had with the staff, to me, it was very notable that there was some individuals who spoke up, and there were others who did not. And I wonder why. Why, what Ms. Sanchez kept emphasizing, this is a safe environment, you're free to speak up, because we were listening. But nevertheless, people did not speak up for whatever reason. So I just want to make sure that if we do decide to do this, that we keep in mind the fact that we want to encourage the diversity of opinion, whether we like it or not, and that because sometimes those contrary opinions may have validity, but nevertheless, in my perspective, is that we need to make sure that the staff who are going to be in the investment committees are free to speak up and somehow rewarded or recognized for the courage and thinking outside the box, so to speak. That's my perspective. Now, with regards to included in the investment beliefs, Mr. Phillip, I think it's a good idea, but how does that change? Does that add by including delegation of authority in the investment beliefs? How does that enhances our ability to be nimble and efficient in terms of our investments? That's my view. And then, the biggest issue in looking at this report that Makita put together, we're right there. We're going to be 100 billion in I don't know, 5 years, 7 years, and we need to operate like that. We need efficiency, and my goal here, our goal here for all of us, is to maximize our return for the benefit of the members. We are here for the members, and so while I would love to retain some authority to hire managers or to do what the CIO does, I'm thinking about how can we improve our efficiency? Can we add an additional return by being nimble and efficient so that's why I think that this is a good idea. But we need guardrails. We need guardrails. And the guardrails, and Mr. Grable has shown that the guardrails that we establish in the delegation of authority, so let's say to the co-investment program, he has, and that's why I feel so confident, because Mr. Grable has kept that. And even when it could go either way, he will bring the matter to the board. I remember when I was the chair, I will call Mr. Grable and say, why are you coming to the board? This is part of your delegated authority. Well, he will explain to me that he was not 100%, and therefore he felt better to take it to the board. I respect that. That is something very powerful to me, because I know that with this current CIO, this is what we're going to get. So anyway, those are my points, and thank you.
Thank you,
John.
Mr. Santos. I will make one comment just to respond immediately to one thing that you've just said. One of the purposes of today's exercise is to look at best practices, and not in one, and there are several pages of examples here. In not one single page is any CIO named ever in that. That is not how you govern. You actually write this for Mr. Grable's successor, not for Mr. Grable. It is about codifying a process that works and putting guardrails. So I fully and wholeheartedly agree that what we need to do is think about what guardrails are appropriate and work with staff, because together we understand what could go wrong and how do we sort of adjust for that, or how do we ensure that we don't have anything go wrong. So I just kind of want to pop that one in the bubble right there. Mr. Grable, I don't know if you wanted to respond, or Mr. Feely, you wanted to respond to.
Maybe if I could go first, and I think I can handle at least three of those, and then maybe John can talk about the investment committees. Chair Sanchez, as you pointed out, none of the policies specifically do name individuals. They oftentimes refer to a position that's listed with the organization, and I think that's because they've gotten to a point where there is the trust in the organizational infrastructure and in the process that they've developed. And then also, it really needs to be about the controls that you have for oversight. And that's really what we're going to try and also elevate. So that's a different maybe way of looking at the guardrails, is elevating that oversight role as much as possible. And I think that's where this ties into the investment beliefs as well, just the sort of power of that oversight role and how important that is. There are some of the investment beliefs that kind of hint to that, but I think that there could be an opportunity to elevate there. And I do think it's also really important that beyond, John is the team in the process, and the overall organization has evolved under John as much as the decisions that you all have made to approve new positions and go through different processes. So all of that still should endure beyond just one individual. And then the other point would be just sort of the nimble and efficient aspect of this. You can't necessarily guarantee that the investment results are going to change or be different. A lot of people do point to the Canadian model where, they have delegation and fully professional boards and investment organizations, and they do have stronger returns. But a lot of that's asset allocation. It's really hard to sort of measure what may be attributable from a performance aspect on which decision-making process you utilize. But the efficiency, I think, is really important, because instead of reviewing 250-page investment memos as part of your reports, you're going to be looking at higher level oversight and really focusing on making sure that all the controls are in place and that the practices and policies are being followed. So it's more efficient use of board time, I would say. But you certainly will be able to take advantage of things more opportunistically if it doesn't have to go through a sort of prolonged search process. And then as far as the use of internal investment committees, sometimes that's the deciding factor. I know that's something that John's developed internally here, so maybe I'll turn it over to him on how he thinks about that structure. But I think that's a critical component of actually delegating, knowing that there is an internal investment committee.
Thanks, Tim, and Madam Chair and trustees. A couple of thoughts are, one, I'll go back to the first part about it in terms of oversight. On the agenda today is my performance evaluation with the board. There isn't any better oversight than that. And something I will say publicly is, as it relates to, I agree that this shouldn't be for an individual. To the extent you don't trust, or any board doesn't trust their chief executive, their chief investment officer, their chief whatever, you should terminate them. It's really as simple as that. And most of us, are at will. As it relates to the point about our internal investment committees, that wasn't done in the context of delegation. That was done to have better discussions internally to arrive at more fulsome discussions. And, 7 years ago, we were 20 some odd people. Now, if fully staffed, we'll be 50 people. I think, 50 people make better decisions than one person. And I think that this process that we shared with the board wasn't done to curry favor. It was done out of the genuine desire to do better by our members. And I too observed that there were people that were quiet. And I think that part of why we constructed that working group, that task force, was to figure out how to optimize our internal discussions. And that group, canvassed the landscape, looked at different models. And I think that it's still under development. I think that our internal process will be better a year from now, 5 years from now, than it is today or next year. But I think that I agree. I mean, it's the whole premise of Tide that you want to avoid groupthink. You want to have a variety of different voices that are included in every discussion. So I agree with the point about the committees.
Great. Mr. Jones?
Okay, so I think this question is for Tim mostly. So a two-part question. One is, what new exposure does a board have, downside exposure, through this model, right? It can't all be ideal, from that perspective. When it goes wrong, right, under this particular model, or if it does, or what have you, what is the level of exposure? What typically happens, or just so that we can again call them guardrails. Well, what guardrails are we guarding from based on previous experience where boards have delegated authority for all the reasons that we're contemplating here now, and it didn't go well?
Yeah, I would say overall, there's really no change in the sort of responsibility in the downside scenarios. Like ultimately, you're making a decision to delegate, and that responsibility goes to other people on a functional basis. But like on the full oversight and what went wrong and who's accountable, ultimately you are the fiduciaries of the plan. So it's not really about like mitigating liability per se. I think it's just shifting the use of the time to, can you work on higher level governance items, making sure all those guardrails are in place, that the critical oversight responsibility of all of that, versus jumping into the weeds on individual manager selection, which may take a lot of time, but may not have a lot of impact on a sort of broad basis, right? So we talk a lot about strategic asset allocation being the highest calling of this board of investments. High level governance, I think, sits right alongside with that, and manager selection, whether delegated or retained, quite frankly, is way down on the list. It's not a random factor, but it is a much lower percentage of overall sort of investment outcome.
Okay. The second part is, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I was going to just give a brief, like one example of a guardrail, for example, that you would naturally put into place, a control, would simply be that because Mr. Grable is going to act as the final point of authority for investments on the team, that the team are originating. The one thing that you would want to be careful of is that Mr. Grable does not originate ideas and then approve them himself, meaning any idea that Mr. Grable brings to the table would actually have to be approved. Something like that is a guardrail that ensures that you don't have a one-man show making decisions.
And then the second part is in kind of the, trust but verify. I've been here since 2020, I guess, at that level. And so John's been here before that, and just listening to the historical narrative about what it was like before, pre-John, and then John coming on, and then staff evolution. So in terms of considering this process where John has rightfully built up a lot of trust capital, for which we are sentimentally and on a performance basis saying, yeah, this only makes sense to extend the policy. there's also an element to me to given institutionally that it seems like, yes, it makes sense at the time, but there's always, part of the reason I think there's a dissatisfaction with institutions is whatever norms got them there at some point, inevitably someone comes along who, for whatever reason, sneaks in under the wire, doesn't quite do it, performance. And so do any of these boards kind of have a flexible policy where as long as John's here, we extend the leash the full 10 feet, but if we were to bring somebody new, we would rein it in a little bit, and there would have to be some period of 1 or 2 or 3 years of trust but verify, make sure the staff doesn't leave that's here because he's an a-hole. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't know that trying to draw I don't know that I believe anymore that culture and just a set of rules totally overrules a bad apple that does manage to get into an environment. And so I'm just asking how much flexibility we as a board can say that as long as John and his team continue to perform as they have the high level of trust, the leash can get longer. But if for some reason John left, we retain the right to pull it back in and require the team to accrue the same trust.
Yeah, I haven't in any of the policies that I reviewed, I hadn't seen that sort of level of granularity again, sort of tied to that position. What I have seen is a high level statement in an IPS where it says this document should be annually reaffirmed by the Board of Investment, something along those lines. So it does give you that flexibility if there were to be a change, but without having to build in that level of specificity, because I just think that's really hard to do. And you already have the structure in place to do it. So the trust but verified through the structure reviews, you're already providing high level oversight and guidance on how each of those investment programs are being managed. And then, in this delegation instance, there'd be implementation decisions that are made by the team, but you're already assigning those guardrails and guidelines, right? So maybe if the PE team were to all decide to start their own shop somewhere, you might want to just narrow down those guidelines in that structure review. So I think you already have the tools in place, but I wouldn't recommend sort of elevating it to like a higher level policy position.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the reaffirmation concept is well, it's practiced. And the review process is good governance. So that is what good governance looks like. Nothing is ever given forever,
And you're going to have natural turnover on a board of investments. So for the new members to also be affirming the existing policy, I think is a really healthy practice overall. I don't know if it has to be every year per se, but something that's, regular, the same way we do strategic asset allocation in a regular manner. I think this would apply there as well.
And one thing that I would highlight too, the notion of making it, and before we got all your materials, actually, I hadn't really thought explicitly about whether or not it is an investment belief or not. But I think that the notion of codifying as an investment belief, the idea that this is a serious professional effort, and that in doing so, we are committing to hiring serious professional people to fulfill our fiduciary obligation. I actually think that's quite powerful in terms of our commitment to ensure that we don't have to. In fact, if John were to leave us, we would be in a position to have to replace someone who's left an incredible footprint. And I don't think we would get the best person if they know that they would come into a distrustful or a lack of trust environment. Meaning, if they came into a legitimate professional position where they are respected and trusted and controlled, and we are responsibly ensuring that the controls are in place, that is how you recruit the best people. You don't recruit the best people when you say, oh, by the way, we're going to hamstring you for a handful of years while you perform. In fact, you look at sort of, and this not to change the conversation, but you look at sort of why it is that women have a tough time accessing capital and getting funded. It is because men are seen as aspirationally, when you talk to men, you look at their potential, and when you talk to women, you say, what have you done for me lately? That is exactly the perspective we would be putting on that position. So I think we as an organization have to think about the commitment we have that this be done in a professional and controlled way. And I think that where we need to put our effort is thinking about what are the right controls. So those questions that Mr. Jones is asking are the right questions. What are the controls we need to be thinking about? And that really is meant to be sort of, I think, not to pull your thunder, not to steal your thunder, but that is the next topic of the conversation, is what are the controls? So this is your opportunity, to ask or even raise and put ideas forth as to the kinds of controls that we need to think about in order to ensure that we as a governing body can execute our job responsibly, right? And in a fiduciary perspective. Yep. All right. Any other comments? Okay, so Mr. Fila, take us through the next kind of steps as to how we get there, Mr. Kreimann.
I'm sorry, I do have a comment,
Yeah.
just very brief. I think from my observations, there's been some discussions about the fiduciary responsibility of the board, the trustees. And I just want to let you know that the observations that I've made in terms of Mr. Grable's management style and his expectations of his staff is that everybody in the investment division and everyone, quite frankly, in the organization has a fiduciary responsibility to our members.
Yeah.
And so I think that permeates through the organization, especially in the investment division, and it attests to the good stewardship that John has provided and the guidance that he's provided. And so I don't want to make light of that or I wanted to make sure that the trustees understand that is the mindset that John and myself for the entire organization has impressed upon our staff. And so hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. So Mr. Fila, you want to take us through kind of how we explore this next phase?
Sure. I have a next step slide a little bit further down in the materials.
37.
37 on the Nikita book, if whoever's driving can hear me still. I've talked a lot, so maybe I'm getting tuned out at this point in time. But so in November, ideally what we'll do is we'll pull together some of this, and I have some pretty good notes on, I think, what might resonate a little bit. So we'll come up with some ideas to propose potentially as IPS modifications, maybe look at drafting an investment belief if you think that might be appropriate as well. And then those will either be potential action items in November or something where we can get additional feedback and then repropose or rework through. But I do think it won't elevate necessarily to the specific guardrails, because I think having that structure review process is the right mechanism for each of those individual asset class guidelines. But certainly the high level policy stuff, I believe we can bring recommendations and we'll, work off of what we've seen and heard here. And then I know John has an internal working group where they've been looking at some of these things, and we'll pull together some ideas. But ideally it would be the high level policy pieces first,
Right.
and then get more granular from there over time.
Thank you. And Mr. Fila, I would suggest in the next kind of go round, as we're going to review a number of things, what would be really helpful is to focus on the control environments of these organizations so that we can look at what, if we can look at their practices in order to inform. I'm sure that will inform your perspective, but I think that would be a focus there would be very helpful for sort of continuing the education process here, and helping us think about kind of how we get, to a place where we're all comfortable. I think that would be extremely helpful. And for those of us who have control, a control perspective, it does, you can sleep better at night knowing that you have recourse as as a governing body, and with sort of strong controls in place. And, I think I am extremely positive on the direction of culture. And Mr. Kreimann's comments are I take them on board, that I do see when I talk to our professional staff, and I see them at conferences, and I see them represent LACERA, it reminds me constantly just the high quality that we have brought on board. And, we need to get the most we can out of them, and, do it in a professional way. All right. So with that, again, if anybody has kind of any, interest in or any perspectives to share in between meetings, please reach out to me so that we can make sure that all the ideas are gathered into, just anything that pops up to you. What about this? How about that? This is the time to delve into that, and we'll figure out the best path forward. All right, moving on. Do we have any last comments? Moving on. Okay. So moving on, we have, again, Mr. Fila. By the way, I bet you felt like you lost a lot of money putting that together as an organization, but I think it was really great. It was a lot of work, and it really came through. All right, so our strategic asset allocation, asset liability study.
Oh, good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees.
Yes.
So the next item is a continuation of the board strategic asset allocation exercise. So today, Makita will introduce concepts of asset liability management. The goal is to set the stage for more detailed discussion in the upcoming months on LACERA's objectives and risk tolerance as it pertains to the asset allocation. John mentioned some of these things in his CIO report this morning. So they're very important discussions. They will touch on a variety of risks such as liquidity, inflation, demographics, and investment risks, to name a few. And they will also help to provide the baseline and the framework for different asset allocation options that Makita and staff will bring forward to the board at a later date. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Tim and Ison.
Perfect. Thank you. If you could just go one slide further to the introduction. Sorry, one more. Oops, one more. Thank you. So I always like to kick these off when we do have investment beliefs that correspond to the topic. LACERA does have, I believe, its first investment belief that states that long-term strategic asset allocation will be the primary determinant of LACERA's risk and return outcomes. And it is the responsibility of the board to set that strategic asset allocation. We're going through a very thorough process to introduce concepts and different tools that we're going to be utilizing to ultimately make a decision, most likely in the March or April timeframe. So this is just another educational piece to show some of the concepts that we're going to be utilizing. I think we've had a lot of conversation about use and relevance of modern portfolio theory as the main tool in strategic asset allocation and the various fundamental, flaws that exist there. This presentation is going to focus on another tool where you're incorporating concepts about the liability into the equation as well. So it's not just about optimizing a portfolio for risk and return. It may be about optimizing it across other dimensions like funded status volatility, contribution volatility, and understanding that those can also be objectives that need to be considered in the overall process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ison, and she's going to go over some of these core concepts with you all.
Yes, as Tim mentioned, there are a couple of things to consider and more than one aspect or a dimension of risk to think about as you're going through your strategic asset allocation and as you're going through your asset liability study. Page 6, please. And when we think about the key risks, usually a lot of times committees can think about, or the boards can think about, investment risk. there are more risks to definitely consider as you're going through an asset liability study, which are summarized on this page, ranging from investments, inflation, liquidity, workforce, cash inflow, and longevity. There are individual pages further down this presentation talking them a little more, but quickly, investments, basically there's the long-term asset appreciation and value, which is funding the pension, but then that is the long term. In the short term, there can be quite significant asset return volatility when you think about the investment risks. Inflation can also affect both ways in that it depreciates the current value of the assets in the pension, and also it can play a role in the participants' benefits. Liquidity, very important as you're paying benefits, and it can have an impact on the investment policy targets. Workforce is a lot about the headcount, but not only about the headcount, also the level of hours worked or the wages earned. Cash flow is ultimately the employer's ability and volatility of contribution, so the employer contribution. And longevity is the risk that participants can live longer than expected, who doesn't want to, but it is a risk to the pension. Next page, please. As we're thinking about these key risks, how we evaluate as Makeda these key risks goes through 4 main areas. So 4 main aspects that we look, which is the likelihood, which is about how likely is the risk to happen, like an investment risk, right? And then if it happens, what will be the effect? How material is that risk? Next is if it happens, and if it's especially material, how do we measure it? Is it quantifiable? And then lastly is the impact of investment policy, which is actually really looking at both ways that as you are designing the investment policy, how do you think about it? And then if these risks happen, how do they impact the investment policy? So looking at this a little more, next page, please, is, for example, again, there are 6 risks to consider, but in the interest of time today, I will focus on the one that is usually the most impactful to the pension, the investment risk. So again, there are 6 examples of this, but in the interest of time, I will focus on the investment today. And when you think about investments and consider the 4 evaluation criteria again, what is the likelihood that the real return on the assets will deviate more than 1% from the assumed rate of return? Highly likely. What mitigates it a little is in the long term, it is expected that the returns will match or exceed the assumption. So if you look at likelihood, it's a high bar, just a little lower than a full bar, because in the long term, there is a little reduction, mitigation of risk, but in the shorter term, there is a high likelihood of returns being variable. So next stage is then how material is that? It's highly material because volatile asset returns can have a big impact on plans' funded status. Well, how do we measure it? It is highly quantifiable. The only aspect to keep in mind is that your expected returns can have a lot of different opinions. So that's one part of additional uncertainty. And ultimately, the impact of policy, well, the plan's asset allocation is the biggest driver of investment risk. And just remember, no policy is investment risk-free. So again, there are 5 more pages on this, but if we can skip to page 14, please. What we can do is basically when we're going through the asset liability study for the strategic asset allocation, how do we evaluate the risks in total, the total risk being the enterprise risk? Well, the asset liability study puts it all together, all these 6 risks together. And then if you can look at the next page, please, in terms of a summary. So recognizing these risks and analyzing is essential to the strategic asset allocation process and the study. And the ultimate being, we want to ensure that LACERA can fulfill its mission to produce, protect, and provide the promised benefits. And then, when you look at the risks, again, you consider all 6, but investments tends to be the biggest driver. With that, I'll turn it over back to Tim.
Perfect, thank you. And I'll stay I'll stay on this page for 1 second. I think the other key consideration is here is when we talk about the liability side, you want to be liability aware. There's a lot that you can't control. Workforce, the longevity, but there are elements of it that you can control and be prepared for. And so that's why that awareness comes into play. Liquidity is a critical one. We'll go through a stress testing exercise, which goes through some pretty draconian scenarios and takes into account how much you have in commitments to private markets and various different levels, and looks at where you might have to be distressed sellers to meet your liquidity needs. So while some of these you can't control, there are definitely ones where you can develop policy that take these risks into account. If you could turn to page 17, just to highlight a couple of things here. So this is the expected benefit payments. You can see this is a pretty strong wave that you see here, and the lighter blue is the actives, and then the inactives. It makes sense that that's just sort of tailing off, right? Those are known and measurable. And I think what's really key here is right now, LACERA is paying out a lot out of this portfolio, but that amount is going to grow, and it's going to grow a lot over the next decade plus. So when we're thinking about liquidity and available funds, you need to be mindful that this is a wave that's coming, and this still doesn't reflect any future benefits that are beyond the current measurement period as well. So yes, the assets will be growing, and they have been growing nicely over the last decade or so, but we definitely need to be mindful that the cash outflows are also going to be growing significantly. Next page. This you've probably seen from Milliman, but just a sort of simplified portion of it, there is a required contribution that's determined by the normal cost plus the unfunded amortization. And basically, so if you do have periods of loss, that means that contribution will go up. That has impacts on your sponsor. LACERA is in a very fortunate position to have a strong sponsor, but you still need to be aware of some of the stresses that, losses can incur on the future outlook of what those potential contributions would be, and how safe and stable you think those could be as well. On the next slide, a couple of different things that can be considered, and we're not recommending any of these for where LACERA is in its current life cycle, but you can delink assumptions. So right now, LACERA has an expected return of 7%. We generally structure a portfolio to optimize for a level of risk to return right in that neighborhood of around 7%. But you could make a determination to say we want to take on some additional investment risk, knowing that we have a long time horizon for these investments to play out, and you can sort of delink some of those assumptions, and that can have various different benefits. Something else as you move on the pathway to 100% funded is this concept of dynamic asset allocation. So essentially, as you're getting closer to your funded target, you can change the risk posture of the plan a little bit to eliminate some of the uncertainty. As you're getting closer to 100, accepting a higher level of short-term loss may become less palatable. So plans will also have a glide path as they get towards funded. So not likely something that we're going to be addressing now, but I think in the higher rate environment, there is an opportunity to de-risk plans and still maintain your overall expected return on plan assets. So those two things are kind of dovetailing a little bit just based on the capital markets environment we're in. Next slide, and then we'll just sort of land the plane. This again shows that sort of inflows and outflows. And the bad news is the benefit payments just keep growing out into time. So LACERA and this led by this board is going to have to work really hard to make sure it's meeting the obligations of the beneficiaries over time. Statutorily at the any given moment in time, the sponsor is the entity that would guarantee these benefits, but it is the obligation of this organization to do the best work that it can to support that mission. And with that, I think I'll just go to the next step slide, which is on 25. think we've hit all the major concepts. But ultimately, this is going to be part of a long process. The next step of it will be you all receiving a survey from us, much like we did 3 years ago with the last asset allocation. It's going to look at some risk tolerance questions. It's going to look at some other sensitivities on funded status, various different things, and we'll use that to start narrowing down the neighborhood of where we're going to make policy recommendations. Again, with the final sort of action taken sometime in the second quarter of next year. So with that, we'll stand for any questions, but mindful that we don't want to take up too much more of your time today.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Knox.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Thank you for the presentation, and I look forward to the survey. Love the slide deck. I actually sent it to my senior and executive managers just because it ties to some of the work we do at Treasurer Tax and the rating agencies and pension obligations and all that. But I also emphasize to them as members, there's a lot of great information in there about how their pension addresses certain risks and how we look at things. So again, I think it ties back a little bit to the meeting earlier. We talked about ESG and what's helpful for members to understand. I think there's really good stuff in there. So
Great,
thank you.
Great. All right. Any other questions? Okay. The rest of the items are for information only, unless anybody wants to pull any of them.
Madam Chair, I just had one comment on the Star Cola memo. I just wanted to give a heads up to our interim CFO because I thought that was an exceptional memo. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kelly. Okay. Do we have any items for staff review?
We do. Okay. Trustee Kelly requested that the method of election voting be provided to the board at the in the next CEO report. That's it.
Okay. Items for future agendas? None? Okay, go to the order.
Mr. Jones?
Go Dodgers.
Please go ahead.
Mr. Kelly?
Please.
Thank you. I had two items. Today is National Coming Out Day, a day first celebrated in 1990 under the belief that LGBT persons should be proud and not feel ashamed about their status. Coming out can take many different forms and is not always an easy process, but I encourage all persons still in the closet to consider coming out. As Audre Lorde, American feminist, author, and self-described warrior once wrote, "Your silence will not protect you." Second, I haven't seen anyone else do this, so I will do it. I wanted to request that we adjourn in the memory of Senator Dianne Feinstein, who served as a senator from this state from 1992 to 2023 and who recently passed away. Senator Feinstein was a woman who broke many barriers in her career and a politician focused on limiting assault weapons and surveillance methods employed by our intelligence agencies, protecting the natural wonders of this great state, and supporting protections afforded to LGBT persons and other minorities. Throughout her political career, she never lost sight of those she served, and we all owe her a tremendous amount of gratitude and respect. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Mrs. Jones?
Thank you. I just, and thank you for that, Mr. Trustee Kelly. Appreciate that because you're absolutely right. And I didn't think of that we should definitely honor her. I just wanted to share that I appreciate the investment report and the level of detail that it has grown to since I first started reading the report. And I'm still learning each time I look at the information. So I do appreciate that. Especially during a time where, we are having negative returns. I think it's really important that we understand the dynamics of what's going on all levels. So I just appreciate all the information that's provided in the report, as well as I also appreciate the conversation that we had today regarding governance. I just am really excited about the next step in the process. And so I also am always, and I don't take it lightly, because I'm on the other end in my normal 9 to 5 of gathering data. So I always acknowledge all of the effort and work that has gone into pulling the data so we can make intelligent decisions. Because I also am aware that if we're giving little data, we'll make a decision, but it will not be as informed as if we have the option of researching and getting all of this information in front of us. It's our decision to read it and digest it and process it, but it's there. But to get that information and process it. And so I just feel so much ease with the decision-making process because I have the information. It's not like I was, given like small bits and pieces. Like, this is like, here's all the data. What do you want to do with it? And I just appreciate that from staff and from Makita and our other consultants that have, that give us the data that we need in order to sit here and, do our best for the membership. And so I just cannot stress that enough, that I appreciate the hours I'm sure that goes into some of these reports. Some hours may be late, some hours may be long. I get it, I understand it. But when we get this packet, it is always very professional. It is put together well. It is very informative. So thank you to the staff.
Thank you. Mr. Roop?
Thank you. I just want to comment on a somber note that the atrocities going on in this world right now, and I feel for and I stand with my Jewish American, Jewish and Israeli friends where these terrorist acts that are occurring. I try not to follow social media because it's so, it's a bunch of trash, but
Technical
term. Technical term. And I was hoping some of the stuff that I saw in there and my wife saw in there was fake, but it turns that these atrocities committed by these terrorists are just unconscionable in this day and age. So I am scared for and I want to uplift and support, all the victims of this war and, my friends of Jewish and Jewish American descent who are very scared right now. And I just can't believe, in our own country, we have a lot of crazy things going on, but I just don't understand how it almost feels like we're going backwards in all respects. I know there's been some wins in labor, but still, it's all the things that we fought for and all the things that we took for granted. It seems like it's coming back full circle. LGBT rights. You just list women's rights. List goes on and on. So it's just don't know what's going on, but I just wanted to reflect and show my support for my Jewish and Jewish American friends.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Green?
Thank you, David, for your words, as well as Joe's. I just want to uplift and appreciate and recognize and say how much great work that our staff does. And I want you to know that you're valued and supported, even though sometimes comments coming from the horseshoe don't always feel that way. Trustee Jones said it, there's thousands and thousands of hours that go into these packets before we even get them. We're not here the 40, 50, 60 hours a week. You are. And it's been said a couple times. We talked about it in our first session this morning. Get calls from members all the time, and you're dealing with life and death situations. You're literally securing people's retirement. So I just want to lift that up. I appreciate so much the work you do. Also want to share that I had the privilege of meeting with our newest U.S. Senator, LaFonza Butler, yesterday, who is a history maker in her own right. She's the first openly gay African-American woman to serve in the Senate in California. And it was an incredible meeting. So amongst some of the real difficult things that are happening in our world and in California, it was this incredibly positive moment of optimism and hope. She's going to be incredible, and she's going to carry the legacy of Dianne Feinstein. And I walked out being ear to ear yesterday thinking about all the great work that she's going to do. I also want to recognize and appreciate Nicole Mee, who's here today, and congratulate her on her victory in her election. Another history maker, and just really recognize the fact that this board has made a real priority the diversity, equity, inclusion. The TIDE initiative is changed the way that pension funds look at diversity, equity, inclusion. That's the hard work, and really also want to lift up our chair, Gina Sanchez, as well. who does incredible work. She's really a terrific spokesperson for LACERA and for us. We were just talking at the break about the great work she's doing in the media to really uplift the diversity, equity, and inclusion that happens. So nobody ever thanks the chair. So I'm going to thank the chair and say thank you for all the great work you do. It doesn't go unnoticed. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Knox?
Good morning, good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Santos?
Yes, thank you. I agree that this is a good meeting, lively discussion regarding the delegation of authority. What I do agree, Mr. Ru, regarding what's going on in Israel. That is horrendous in my view. I actually, despite what George Santos said, I did go to Baruch College. And in Baruch College at the time, I don't know, it's 70 to 80% of the student population were Jewish. And I got an appreciation, and I had great close friends going through college with me. And I developed an appreciation for the Jewish community in this country and globally. And I also, some of the areas that are being bombed or rocket in Israel, I visit not too long ago. And I'm just amazed of what's going on. Also, I stand in solidarity with the striking workers. The labor movement has been under attack for many, many years, decades. It's about time that the workers of America stand up, because it is ridiculous that the CEOs, and there's something that we discussed this morning, they make 300% more than the line worker, 300%. And these people are just trying to make a living wage. Housing in most of the United States, and particularly in California, is extremely expensive. People cannot afford to buy homes today, can't even pay rent. It's just terrible that we treat the people that do some of the work that we use every day. The hospital workers, the retail workers, the hotel workers, the restaurant workers. It's just sad that in the most powerful and richest country in the world, we are dealing with this stupidity. It's just insane. With regards to what Mr. Green said regarding diversity and how historical is for me to be one of our colleagues on this board, I got to give credit to Mr. President David Green and SCIU, because you have always emphasized that we need diversity on this board. We need to embrace diversity, and that leadership, Mr. Green, has reflected in how our boards, because I know you do on the union, as the leader of the union, you do a lot of work with the board of supervisors, as well as a rank and file, to make sure that we get the type of diversity that we have. So tip my hat to you and your leadership, because that's what we need. Leaders that are willing to walk the walk. So thank you. And I wish everybody have a beautiful day.
Thank you. John?
All very difficult words to follow, so I have nothing to add.
Thank you. Santos? Kreimann?
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Gina?
Thank you. So, yes, so I'll begin with my my appearances on behalf of LACERA. I had the opportunity to address IDAC in Chicago at the conference to represent our TIDE initiative, also to represent that initiative to the a separate breakout group at the IDAC conference for the students of the University of Chicago. And then a separate appearance the day after at the Illinois State Treasurer's conference on the same topic. And I will say that I was incredibly pleased and proud to share the work that Mr. Grable, Mr. Drazel, Mr. Perez all have done on our behalf, being armed with the observations and the statistics from our efforts. And the kind of evidence-based approach that we take is incredible. And I came back with my own observations that I immediately called Mr. Grable about, opportunities that we always want to, take, see what other plans are doing and see where we can, emulate or, learn from, that and figure out how to do it ourselves. And, I put together, this comment, that I really wanted to think about how we incentivized our investment managers to utilize minority broker dealers as a way of expanding our sort of goal of expanding our influence. And I think one of the things that I very much appreciate about Mr. Grable and his approach is that it is very pragmatic and it is very evidence-based. And I think you get the best outcomes. I think one of the reasons that our program is so robust is because we don't come at it from a kind of pure believer's perspective. We actually take the time to gather the data and ensure that we are doing the right thing by our beneficiaries. And it wasn't just a lock, stock in, okay, let's do it. It was, let me study this. Right? We've done this work. We're going to gather this data. And I think that and I appreciate that what we have developed is a partnership in getting things done. And that partnership is based in evidence and that we are making what I believe are the right decisions that have nothing to do with an agenda and everything to do with our obligation. And I was reflecting on that as I was listening to Ms. Jones speak about the fact that as we move forward into this sort of next phase of our development as an organization, that we are doing so with full knowledge. And, this is one where I'm on the believer side and I am kind of watching the organization kind of absorb that the information. It's a lot and I understand it, but I recognize that in being so adamant in making sure that we have the right control environment, we will have the better outcome. And I think that is what diversity of opinion looks like. It looks like people who truly come from a different perspective and bring that perspective to the table to the best outcome. So I really, I just want to underscore how proud I am of the effort and the success that we've had in our program and the progress that we've made, but just really in the fact that it actually comes through in the way that we operate as a board and as an organization. So I am very pleased. On that more somber note, I do share the same intense, sadness for what is happening around the world and concern that that we are entering, we are continuing to go down a path that is dangerous, not only, for our friends in Israel, but for the world. I actually did celebrate Yom Kippur, and I haven't fasted in a very, very long time. And I don't know why I chose to fast this year, but I did. And it is a time of reflection. And I think that, we should take a moment as well to reflect. So with that, I believe we will now go into a quick turnaround in order to go into our executive session. So let's go ahead and take 12 minutes and begin at noon on the dot. so that everybody can take a break. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.